Hi all, it's kingscrusher here. I have a very interesting game to show you today. Magnus Carlsen against Anish Giri. The very interesting thing about this, statistically before the game, Anish Giri is one of the few Super GMs with a plus score against Anish Giri. So the record prior to this game, 1-0 with 14 draws according to ChessGames.com stats. Including rapid or exhibition games, Magnus Carlsen has beaten Giri 5-4 with 18 draws. If it's only rapid or exhibition games, Magnus Carlsen has beaten Anish Giri 4-3 with 4 draws. So the interesting thing here is basically prior to this game, Magnus Carlsen has never ever beaten Giri, and that's been a very interesting thing statistically. Just like analogous to the Nakamura game we saw recently, where Nakamura has never actually beaten Carlsen. So could the statistics be radically altered here? Could Magnus Carlsen actually defeat Giri, who has a reputation of being a very solid player, and has recently also been subject to some draw jokes because he's been drawing lots of games. But let's see what happened in this game. Magnus Carlsen kicked off with d4. We have d5 and now bishop f4. So this is one way of getting to the London system. Yes, I was going to say dreaded, but it's rising in popularity, and many thought it might have been confined to Kamsky using this system, and which results often in draws with the white pieces, but it does avoid a heavily theoretical debate. Now, actually, there is a little bit of a surprise actually from Anish Giri. You might think, why is this surprising? But the symmetrical move bishop f5 is not as popular actually as another method which has been well worked out. So not to mirror the opponents, but to actually play knight f6 here, with the idea of a quick c5. And the idea I believe is basically around b2, because the bishop's left b2. So black is going to put pressure on white like this, and there's some sharp stuff in a way with c4 and this bishop f5 move. So if takes, we've got queen takes b2. And this position here, even though black has released the tension in the sense of, because the bishop's outside the pawn chain, it's supposed to be about equal. So that's one way, very well known, of kind of trying to equalize, but it's not involving the mirror move, bishop f5. So that's a little bit surprising. I think Magnus expressed some surprise at that. So we have e3, e6, bishop d3, and now we see some issues for black already here, really, because if the bishop retreats, it is subject all the time to white having the option of giving black doubled pawns, and maybe the g5 score is more significant after that. For example, so the bishop didn't retreat in this game, it took here, but let's imagine the bishop retreat. This kind of variation gives white the option of just doubling the pawns. And okay, it doesn't actually matter so much about this one because there'll be a good grip on e5. So this kind of position is slightly better for white. So yeah, in a way it is a little bit controversial in a way, in that now after bishop takes d3, white does seem to have quite a pleasant position from really using a non-theoretical weapon of choice. Okay, so of course way back in time you had masters like Sultan Khan, the legend, who was using London system type structures and e5 and dark square play with great effect, winning tournaments like the British Championship. So it's been used throughout the history of time, really, this kind of setup, simple setup. But you can see that white's got a small plus here. And in fact, black doesn't seem willing to even bother challenging the bishop with bishop d6. We have knight bd7 here. If bishop d6, it is possible sometimes sometimes to play knight e5, and that causes you know, tactical problems for black. For example, here there's knight takes f7, hitting the queen, hitting the bishop. So this is just annoying potentially for black. But okay, so in the game we have knight bd7, a4, c5, and in fact here the possibility of c4 is kind of ignored. We see a5, c4, queen e2, and now b5. So this is kind of aggressive looking on the queen side. A takes. So we have staring rooks now. Pistols at dawn, staring rooks. Knight e5. Now white is threatening knight c6 in this position to try and maybe get that dark square bishop. And with this move, in fact, Magnus is inviting doubled e-pawns. And black actually takes that opportunity up to, well, it's white's option here, bishop takes e5 or d takes. But d takes is more interesting. It's double pawned, but what it does do is give that d4 square for a knight. That's often a juicy square in this position. You can imagine if these dark square bishops are exchanged off later, if a knight comes to d4, it's pretty good there. But for the moment, there's also another thing. The pawn on here has dislodged the knight, which means now, weakness to the last move, this g4 square is available to the white queen. And this means that there's an immediate idea of bishop h6 to win the exchange. If g6, we just take on f8. So black reacts to that. So it seems as though white's kind of on the attack. We have h4 here. It's really looking too dangerous to take this pawn. It can't be taken here anyway because the rook takes, and then we take on h4. But say black was desperate to take this pawn. This looks a little bit as though white's getting some significant compensation. This position. So for example, knight f3 to d4, but there's also rook a7 possibilities. So anyway, Anish wasn't interested in that. You know, especially a knight coming to d4 with tempo, it looks like positional compensation straight off the bat, if nothing else. So in fact, we see f5, queen h3, and the same sort of thing, or even worse, the knight on d4 here coming with tempo would hit e6. So we have rook takes a1, rook takes, and again ignoring this pawn, we have in fact a pawn sack instead with c3. That's taken, queen c7. So black, by doing this pawn sack, is hoping to not just regain the pawn, but regain it with interest, and is also looking at taking out white's center pawn. Magnus just looks after his c pawn here with c4. So very, very interesting what is actually going on here. If black takes this pawn, then he's shielding in fact white's c2 pawn. So white could come to now defend d4 and be in a very comfortable position with the knight still coming to d4, sorry, knight f3 to protect e5, and then things like queen g3, knight d4. It looks very comfortable with minimal queenside counterplay for black. In fact, Anish took this center pawn, and this leads to a position which is a little bit scary for black, because we have a very nice move, queen g3. If you remember in the 1972 Fischer-Spassky match, Fischer in a key game got a queen to g6, so it was like hitting, it was influenced in the center as well as the king side. This is a beautifully placed queen, not just with that pin, reinforcing the pin, but also pressure on g7. And there's actually, in this position, it's tricky. Black actually technically makes a slight mistake with bishop d6, but there's a hidden resource here which I'm not entirely sure many humans, unless they were told this was a puzzle position, they'd be totally like oblivious to this tactical idea that's available here, because it looks as though black's fairly solid and okay, but you know, to the human eye solid, but to an engine, black is not that solid. White is getting an advantage by force here. And this actually took Magnus by surprise when he was told about it after the game. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play with white? This is a very, very tactical, strong idea. I'm not saying it's like a forced mate after, but it's a significant edge to white after if this move, this little combination was played. So white to play here, what would you play in this position? You might want to pause the video. So I'm asking you basically to find the move that Magnus Carlsen missed. And I think he would have definitely played it if he had seen this little combination. So you might pause the video starting from now, 5 seconds. White to play. Okay, Magnus played c takes d5, and that is a nice move in its own right, by the way, because it isolates black's pawn and gives a nice blockade square on d4 potentially. But there is a really interesting resource, c5. So if takes, we just take on e5. Same with the queen. We just take on e5, no problem. And also, by the way, a threatening mate. So the point is here, can you see the move here? If I give you 5 seconds, white to play. It's rook a6. Yeah, threatening rook takes d6 and bishop e5. If knight f7 doesn't help, we just play bishop takes d6, we're still winning a piece there. If rook here, rook takes, we're just crumbling this protection of e5. And actually we're still threatening mate. This is a great position, bishop and knight against rook. And note also h5, knight f3, it's a great position. Yeah, whatever way this is taken, it's just good for white. This is even worse, of course, because the skewer. So that's even worse. So basically, this is just a nice, amazing little combination that exists in the position, really. But as I say, this is strong as well because it's isolating black's queen's pawn, and the knight is heading for that beautiful blockade square. It can't go this route because, of course, there's that naughty check wrecking everything for white, in fact. So this is the safe way to get to the blockade square, but it does involve sacking a pawn. But it's ingenious because Magnus is basically getting a very, very strong knight by sacrificing a pawn. This is genius, really. From a human perspective, this pawn sack, because note also, it's not just the knight on d4, it's white's a file in this position, which is important. Anish Giri dares to take this pawn on c2 now. I mean, if he doesn't, the knight's coming to d4 anyway. Okay, knight d4, which hits the queen, and also f5. We have the queen coming back to c8, defending f5. h5, we have queen d7, rook b1. The pawn is protected there, f3. Queen f7. Now rook a1 here, not minding this pawn being taken. Yes, that would be 2 pawns up for black, but too much pressure here after rook a7. This wasn't played. It would just be too much pressure. Black played bishop d6, just to show that if queen takes here, there's a crushing move in this position. Can you see? If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, knight b5, it's just crushing because black's going to lose material after that. It's too loose, the pieces. Okay, so basically, yeah, queen takes a5 is not to be recommended here. We see bishop d6, which prevents rook a7 for the moment as well. Rook a6 instead. Now queen takes h5. Is there enough pressure here? Well, white's getting a pawn back immediately. So, but has he got too much pressure on black in this position? Anish Giri plays knight c4 now, and you might think this is intriguing. Why give up 2 pieces for the rook? It's starting to look like a really difficult position though. If instead of knight c4, say the bishop went back, rook b7 is dangerous. It's probably stronger than rook takes b8 actually, because on rook takes b8 there might be some counterplay with rook b1 check and stuff. So rook b7 just going for the throat in this variation. creating that weakness here. And now here, instead of taking, because again black will get some counterplay, we have instead in this line there's a crushing move in knight e6. This is absolutely crushing. If rook takes, then we take with check and take on e5. And say rook c8, then queen e1, and there's a beautiful maneuver here. Say g5, rook takes b8 is crushing. This is all pretty crushing stuff. But there's also, you know, a beautiful maneuver coming in with queen a1 in some lines here. So it's all pretty tricky stuff. So basically, yeah, you might think, you know, why this knight c4, but yeah, if what are the alternatives? This is just too dangerous, this rook on the 7th in this position. If we look at this position, it just seems far too dangerous. Okay, so yeah, let's go back to the game. So knight c4, we get, Magnus rather gets 2 pieces now for the rook, but it's not, you know, that clear cut. Bishop e5, queen g6, we have queen f4, check, rook a1. And here, actually, after queen d2, there is a mistake played now by Anish Giri. So this is move 37. This is definitely not the best move. The best move here, it seems to be f4. So it threatens things like queen g3. And in this case, for example, here, queen a6, knight e2, queen c4, and it's difficult for white to actually try and win this in practice. Black has an extra pawn as well as the rook versus knight and bishop, so it's kind of balanced. It's difficult. That'd be a difficult position to try and win. But with rook a8, the winning chances of white have suddenly dramatically surged up in this position. Can you see why? If I give you 5 seconds, white to play in this position, can you see a nice idea? Nice move, rather. Nice tactic. So 5 seconds to pause the video starting from now. Okay. Knight takes f5, actually. Threatening knight e7 check, forking king and queen. And threatening queen takes d5 check, forking rook and king. So the knight's kind of immune, because this will be running with check, actually. Taking on a8 will be with check. If we just have a quick look at this, it's with check, and then there'll be another check. So there's no actual time to take the bishop or anything. It's all running with check there. So that's a pretty unfortunate tactic to run into. Knight takes f5. We have now queen e6, and the problem here, so that addresses also knight e7 as the threat as well. It's queen d5. But the problem is now queen g5. Black's king side is under great pressure all of a sudden. If queen takes e5, you might think that defends there, but actually knight h6 check at least wins the queen here. Queen takes e5 next. So yeah, this is pretty nasty stuff. So we have g6 fending off the mates, but now the 2 minor pieces with the queen are quite vicious. Knight g4, the king makes a bit of a run for it, but where? Check. Knight takes h7, shedding another pawn, so now white's actually a pawn up. It seems a bit pointless to throw in a check here, because the king's got g3, and then what? So we actually see rook a4. And now a really clever move from Magnus Carlsen again in this position. Can you see what white plays if I give you 5 seconds? Okay, he finds the coordination point of queen and knight here, that f8. So that's actually a mate threat in one. And you might think, well, what about this bishop? Why is he leaving this bishop hanging? Rook a2 check was played. Now, the question about this bishop, let's answer it. Queen takes e5. There'll be check. This is all pretty forced. Check. So here, if king d6, then there's check, check, and check here is crushing. It's kind of going to be mate. For example, in this line, knight takes g6. It's not just winning the queen, it's like mate. So yeah, all the lines are basically lost here after this queen f8 check. King f5 is not immediately in my notes, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure this is untenable. It looks as though queen f7 check here is actually crushing. A bit of improvisation, which I don't like to do, but queen f7 looks pretty convincing actually here, because the knight's covering g5, so that would just be mate there. So yeah, these lines, the queen's just getting lost here, basically, in this position, whatever happens. If king f6, by the way, knight d7 check, yeah, queen's lost in these lines. So what we see here after this queen d8 is this check here. Now it would be a mistake to play king g3 because that's check. So the king actually goes to g1 in this position, and we have the same tactics actually that we've just seen. By the way, the rook is stopped from a1 with that bishop. So actually Giri is in a very difficult state, and you'll note if also the rook's a loose piece here. If queen e7, there's at least also queen takes d5 check, pick out another pawn at least. But okay, black actually resigned here. He didn't really want to play on. If this line, by the way, then there's knight g5, forking king queen there. So this is pretty bad for black trying to hold on to d5 and protect against queen f8. So just to recap, it's the same lines as before on queen takes e5. This is just losing the queen eventually. We've seen those lines just before, but they're virtually, well, the same. The only difference is the rook is on a2. So yeah, here after king g1, it's too much for black. Black cannot actually defend this, and Giri resigned. And this is the first time Magnus Carlsen has beaten Giri on a classical time limit. So weird things are happening in terms of classical results in this particular tournament. So it was the first time that Nakamura had beaten Carlsen in a long game, and now it's the first time Magnus Carlsen's beaten Giri in a long game. Okay, but you know what? It's interesting that such a solid opening can be used with great effect. This London system. So is this yet another game to improve the popularity of the London system? I hope not. Except I might use it myself in 1 or 2 games. You never know. Okay, comments, questions, likes, all appreciated. Thanks very much.